The tributes continue to pour in for the late former Indian Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh after he breathed his last on Thursday night. Dr. Manmohan Singh was 92. He's survived by his wife and 3 daughters. The leaders from across the world bid farewell to India's former Prime Minister. Many, in fact, have written lengthy messages on social media sharing anecdotes from their interaction and meetings with the veteran leader. All tributes have been unanimous on the enormous efforts that Dr. Manmohan Singh had made in strengthening India's economy. The envoys to India from some of the biggest nations have also expressed their condolences at the former Prime Minister's demise. The ambassadors of China, Russia, Israel and the United States highlighted the role that Dr. Manmohan Singh had played in furthering India's diplomatic ties. All right, now to talk more on this, we're joined by Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who is a 4th-term Member of Parliament from Thiruvananthapuram and also former Minister of State and also a best-selling author and a former Under-Secretary General at the United Nations. He's joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Dr. Tharoor, thank you very much indeed, sir, for taking time out and speaking to us here on WION. Now, we're looking at the legacy of Dr. Manmohan Singh, who just passed away. He is someone who's regarded as the architect of India's policy of liberalization, privatization and globalization that set India on the path to economic recovery from the 1990s onwards. In your assessment, what do you think defines Dr. Manmohan Singh's legacy?
Well, I think economics is a very large part of it, but not the only part. He was the finance minister who famously paraphrased Victor Hugo and said, "No power on earth can stop an idea whose time has come." And with that idea, he completely liberalized the Indian economy, which he took by the scruff of the neck in 1991 as an inefficient and underperforming centrally planned economy. He transformed that into a thriving, entrepreneurial and increasingly globalized economy with a dynamic and creative business culture, dealing with the world on its own terms, and most important, pulling over 10 million people a year above the poverty line. And he came back as Prime Minister after a 5-year stint as Finance Minister. He then had about 9 years in opposition, came back as Prime Minister for 10 years and completely solidified this transformation. At a time when the world went through the global financial crisis of 2008 and 2009, India weathered it because of Dr. Manmohan Singh's stewardship. And you may remember President Obama famously saying that when the Prime Minister of India speaks, the world listens. His was the one voice that was heard with the greatest respect in the G20 when world leaders gathered to discuss the global macroeconomic situation. The Indian economy grew nearly 7% on his watch. The services sector grew even faster, 9%, and accounted for much of India's GDP growth, a stabilizing factor. When a world in recession couldn't afford to buy more manufactured goods, Indian services continue to sell.
Right.
And you've seen under Dr. Manmohan Singh a real attention being paid to the future of the country. Even in his 80s, he was constantly thinking about the youth of India and what could be done to make a better life for them. And
Indeed.
I would say that all the transformations that he brought about have been successfully continued by the very government that came to power on the backs of excoriating him in the 2014 elections. It's one of those great ironies.
Right.
Most of the initiatives he introduced are the ones that have been continued successfully by the successor government.
You know, one of the reforms that not many people have been talking about enough, although we speak of Manmohan Singh as this great economist, the person who was the architect of India's economy since the 1990s, you know, the fact that right to information was brought during his term changed the way that the general public interacts with the bureaucracy and the government. For the very first time, bureaucracy, which had been hiding its work behind, you know, strange reasonings of secrecy, for the very first time, the common public of India could, of course, ask the government how it was spending its money and how it was functioning. Tell us about this legacy of right to information and as to how it has changed India's political system.
Right. I was only talking about economics in my first response, but there's a lot more beyond economics. And that's a very good example of something he introduced as Prime Minister, which essentially means that anybody can write to the government on a postcard demanding an explanation for how taxpayers' money has been spent on any particular issue, and the government is obliged to respond. This right to information was a pretty much unprecedented act in the developing world. It did exist in some developed countries, but we got it into India, and it's become now a sort of reflexive habit for many Indians to demand information under RTI. Dr. Manmohan Singh also brought in something that transformed rural India, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which guarantees 100 days of paid employment for people below the poverty line in rural India, transforming the purchasing power of people who had very little disposable income and essentially keeping them off the streets in the cities by giving them decent work for better pay. All of this is just one thing after another. We haven't talked about his impact on foreign policy. He raised India's stature enormously around the world through his own knowledge, his own instinctive reopening of India to both the East and the West, to Southeast Asia, to the US. The Indo-US nuclear deal was a substantial achievement that ended India's somewhat pariah status in the global nuclear fraternity. He did an enormous amount to transform the lives of ordinary Indians, opening bank accounts for the poor, essentially transferring benefits directly to them, all sorts of things, which I think, and indeed introducing what became known as the Aadhaar card, the individual digital identification number that's given every Indian citizen an identity that they can use then for welfare benefits and all sorts of other things to facilitate their transactions in this country. All of these were Manmohan Singh initiatives. People forget how much our lives have been transformed by his leadership and his prime ministership of this country.
And very quickly, if I were to ask you, three defining aspects of Manmohan Singh, what would you rank them as and what would they be?
Well, as I mentioned already, the economic transformation of the country, liberalization, the helping India survive the global financial crisis, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee and the Right to Information Act, the overall panoply of rights-based initiatives that gave Indians everything: right to education, right to information, right to food security. All of this gave Indians a sense of empowerment that very few could point to on the same scale before or since.
Indeed. Thank you very much, indeed, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, for joining us with that perspective there.
Thank you very much.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.